The November wind cut across the high desert like a blade, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something that made Jack Morrison pull his horse to a stop on the ridge. He'd been riding fence line for 3 days, checking the boundaries of his ranch that stretched across the New Mexico territory, and he was bone-tired and ready to head home. But that smell on the wind stopped him cold. Smoke. Old smoke, the kind that comes after a fire has burned itself out. Jack clicked his tongue and urged his mare forward, following the scent down into a shallow draw where a cluster of cottonwoods provided the only shade for miles. As he rounded the bend, he saw it, the charred remains of a covered wagon, its canvas top burned away, the wooden frame blackened and skeletal against the pale desert sky. He'd seen this before. Too many times. Cholera sometimes. Raiders, other times. The trail west was littered with graves and burned-out dreams. Jack had stopped counting them years ago, stopped letting himself feel too much about the tragedies that dotted the landscape like cairns marking the cost of hope. But then he saw movement. At first, he thought it was a coyote or a wild dog, something hunched and small near the wreckage. But as he drew closer, walking his horse slow and easy so as not to spook whatever it was, he realized it was a child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside what had to be a body covered with a torn blanket. She didn't look up when he approached. Didn't acknowledge his presence at all. She just sat there, still as stone, one small hand resting on the blanket-covered form. Jack dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. The girl's dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with dust and ash. Her face was sunburned, lips cracked from thirst, but her eyes, when she finally lifted them to look at him, were clear and defiant. "Easy there," Jack said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said nothing, just stared at him with those fierce, unblinking eyes. Jack glanced at the wagon, taking in the scene. The fire hadn't been recent, a few days old, at least. There were signs of hasty looting, supplies scattered and trampled. No other bodies that he could see, but the blanket-covered form told enough of a story. "That your ma?" he asked gently. The girl's jaw tightened, but she nodded once. "Anyone else with you? Your pa? Brothers or sisters?" She shook her head. Jack felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he'd thought he'd buried along with his own ghosts. He crouched down, trying to make himself less imposing, and pulled his canteen from his belt. "You need water," he said. "How long you been out here?" The girl's eyes flicked to the canteen, and he saw her throat work in a hard swallow. But she didn't reach for it. Didn't move except to tighten her grip on the blanket. "It's all right," Jack said, setting the canteen on the ground between them. "Take it. You'll make yourself sick if you don't drink soon." Still, she hesitated. Jack waited, patient as the desert itself, until finally her resolve cracked. She snatched up the canteen with one hand, never letting go of the blanket with the other, and drank in desperate gulps. "Slow down," Jack warned. "Not too fast or you'll bring it right back up." She ignored him, draining half the canteen before she came up gasping. Water ran down her chin, cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. Jack studied her while she caught her breath. She was a scrapper, this one. Had to be, to survive out here alone for days. Most kids would have wandered off, looking for help or water, and died in the attempt. But this girl had stayed, guarding her mother's body like a sentinel, waiting for, what? For someone to come? For permission to let go? "What's your name?" he asked. The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Sarah," she said, her voice rough and raw. "Sarah Coulter." "Well, Sarah Coulter, I'm Jack Morrison. I've got a ranch about 15 miles north of here. You can't stay out here." "I'm not leaving her," Sarah said immediately, her hand gripping the blanket tighter. Jack nodded slowly. He understood. God help him, he understood better than she knew. "We'll bury her proper," he said. "I've got a shovel on my pack horse. We'll do right by her, I promise you that. But then you've got to come with me. You understand? You'll die out here if you stay." Sarah's defiance flickered, uncertainty crossing her young face. "I don't know you." "No, you don't," Jack agreed. But I'm what you've got right now, and I'm offering you a choice between dying out here or taking a chance on living. Your ma, she'd want you to live, wouldn't she? The girl's eyes filled with tears for the first time, but she blinked them back furiously, refusing to let them fall. Jack recognized that, too, that stubborn refusal to show weakness, to admit to the pain that was trying to tear you apart from the inside. He stood up and walked back to his horse, giving her space to think. He unsaddled the pack horse and retrieved the shovel, then walked a short distance away to where the ground looked soft enough to dig. He didn't ask permission. He just started digging, working methodically in the afternoon heat, piling up the red desert soil. After a while, Sarah came to stand beside the growing hole, still clutching that blanket. She liked flowers, she said quietly. Yellow ones especially. Jack paused, leaning on the shovel. Not much grows out here except sage and cactus, he said. But there's wildflowers in the spring on my ranch. Paintbrush and primrose. Yellow as sunshine. Sarah nodded, as if this meant something to her, as if it was enough. They buried her mother as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Jack said a few words, simple and honest, because he'd never been good with prayers but figured God would understand the intent if not the poetry. Sarah stood silent throughout, dry-eyed and straight-backed, her small body rigid with the effort of holding herself together. When it was done, Jack fashioned a cross from 2 pieces of the wagon's frame and planted it at the head of the grave. Sarah found a piece of charcoal from the burnt wagon and carefully wrote her mother's name, Elizabeth Coulter, beloved mother. You ready? Jack asked when she'd finished. Sarah looked at the grave for a long moment, then at the ruined wagon, then at the vast empty desert stretching in every direction. Finally, she looked at Jack. I don't have anywhere else to go. You're coming with me, kid, Jack said, not unkindly. It wasn't a question anymore. It was simply what was going to happen, the only reasonable path forward in an unreasonable world. He lifted her up onto his mare. She weighed almost nothing, he noticed, light as a bird, and climbed up behind her. Sarah sat stiff in front of him, not leaning back, not trusting enough yet to relax. Jack didn't blame her. They rode through the cooling evening, and Jack told her about the ranch. About the cattle and horses, about his foreman Miguel and Miguel's wife Rosa, who cooked better than any restaurant chef Jack had ever encountered. About the mountains in the distance and the creek that ran through the property, cold and clear even in summer. Sarah didn't respond much, but he could tell she was listening by the way she tilted her head slightly toward his voice. He kept talking anyway, filling the silence with words because silence out here could be crushing, could make you feel like you were the last person alive in the world. It was full dark by the time they reached the ranch house, a sprawling adobe structure that Jack's father had built 30 years before. Lights glowed in the windows, and as they rode up, the front door opened and Rosa appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Dios mío, she breathed when she saw Sarah. Jack, what? Found her out by Dead Man's Draw, Jack said, dismounting and lifting Sarah down. Wagon burned, mother dead. No one else. Rosa's expression shifted from surprise to heartbreak to determination in the space of seconds. She stepped forward and knelt down to Sarah's level, speaking in rapid Spanish before switching to English. You poor little thing. Come inside. You need food and a bath and clean clothes. Come, come. Sarah looked at Jack, uncertain, and he gave her a small nod. Go on, he said. Rosa's good people. She'll take care of you. He watched as Rosa guided Sarah into the house, one gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, already making plans he could hear in her voice. Hot water, soup, a bed in the spare room, clothes that could be altered to fit. Miguel appeared from the barn, and Jack filled him in on what he'd found. Together they tended to the horses, the familiar routine grounding after the strangeness of the day. When Jack finally made it inside, he found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, scrubbed clean and wearing one of Rosa's nightgowns that had been hastily pinned up to keep from dragging on the floor. She was working her way through a bowl of soup, eating slowly but steadily. Rosa caught Jack's eye and mouthed, 3 bowls, with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The kid had been starving, though she'd hidden it well. Jack sat down across from Sarah. She looked different, clean, younger somehow, more fragile without the armor of dirt and defiance. You'll stay here, he said. Long as you need to. We'll figure out if you've got any family somewhere, but until then, this is home." Sarah set down her spoon. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question. Jack considered it, considered all the answers he could give, about duty and decency and the code of the West. But in the end, he settled on the truth. Because someone should have helped me once, and they did. Because that's what people do when they're worth a damn. Because you're just a kid and you deserve a chance. Sarah studied him for a long moment, those old eyes in that young face, weighing and measuring. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she gave a small nod and went back to her soup. Jack stood up to leave, to let her eat in peace, but her voice stopped him. "Mr. Morrison?" He turned back. "Yeah. Thank you," she said quietly. "For burying her proper. For not leaving her there." Jack felt that twist in his chest again. "You did good, kid. Staying with her, taking care of her even after she was gone. That took guts." Something in Sarah's expression cracked just slightly, and he saw the child beneath the survivor, scared and alone and trying so hard to be brave. But she didn't cry. Just nodded and returned to her soup. Jack walked out onto the porch and stood looking up at the stars scattered across the desert sky like diamonds on black velvet. He thought about the girl inside, about the long road ahead of her, about all the ways the world could break a person and all the ways they could choose to keep going anyway. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and questions and decisions. But tonight, one lost child had found shelter, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything that mattered.